from Harlem in New York. We're here to mark the 50th anniversary since the birth of hip-hop. It revolutionised music, but as you'll see in part 3 of our series, it also changed fashion forever.
Hip-hop and fashion have been linked ever since the music started at the block parties in the Bronx in the 70s. As a voice for the marginalised, its look mattered as much as its sound, partly as an expression of self-identity, partly as shorthand for success.
Hip-hop fashion is to take nothing and make it something powerful, something that represents you.
We meet the man who went from a fashion industry pariah for his designs knocking off luxury labels to a Gucci god, and music journalist and author of Fashion Killer, Soumya Krishnamurthy.
What Dapper Dan did that was so revolutionary was really bringing this idea of kind of this Harlem aesthetic into high fashion.
A Dapper Dan fan who will clap a man. On my chest, I don't need Dapper Dan.
I am hip-hop.
Causing ruckus in the rucker. I'm a beast going straight for the juggler. Like King Kong stepping on what's a monkey.
I love a people's costume.
Over the years, hip-hop's biggest stars have become as much icons of style as of music. Run DMC and Adidas, LL Cool J's Kangol hats, Snoop Dogg and Nicki Minaj's bling, and Cardi B is the face of Balenciaga.
What's up, though? Yes, bro. When I was growing up, during the 50s and 60s, it was like this. In the mid-60s is when it changed. And it changed because of the drug epidemic. And I escaped through fashion.
What was it like in Harlem growing up in the 50s and 60s?
We have a saying, so goes Harlem, so goes the whole black world. Harlem triggers culture among people of color everywhere. Harlem was a cultural pot where we all interacted together. Poor Italians, poor Irish, poor African Americans, poor Puerto Ricans. So it was like a fusion, what I call a gumbo of culture, and that's what defined it.
And you were surrounded by drug dealers, hustlers, gang members. How did you find fashion?
Poverty. For me, it came from holes in my shoes. It was more necessity than passion, because you wanted to be somebody, and nothing transformed you better than fashion. I came from the poorest neighborhood in Harlem, the poorest of the poor. But nobody knew what neighborhood I came from if I got dressed up. So that's where their passion came from the transformative value that clothes and fashion has. Clothes say, I'm here. You have to look at me now.
Marked by the history of slavery and the fight for civil rights, Dapper Dan went to Africa in the early 70s. It was in the Liberian capital Monrovia that he discovered his fashion vocation, Africanizing, as he called it, his creations.
And how did your store start?
I came from a criminal culture, but I didn't want to be involved in it no more, so I decided to open up a store. I Blackanized European fashion, I Africanized European fashion, and it just took on from there. So I mixed the same thing we do with jazz, same thing we do with all music and all the culture. I just took our culture, mixed it with our older culture, and came up with something new.
Dapper Dan loved luxury, but the fashion houses weren't making clothes that cater to black people, so he decided to make them himself. He set up his boutique on 125th Street in Harlem in 1982, in the midst of New York's crack epidemic. It was open 24/7 to cater to the schedules of his clientele, gangsters and hustlers, and later famous athletes like Mike Tyson, and musicians like Salt and Pepper, Run DMC, and LL Cool J. First, he focused on furs, silks, and alligator skins. But when a local drug dealer came in with a Louis Vuitton pouch, Dap realized the power of the logo. In the same way that sampling was rife in the music, so it became in hip-hop fashion. By producing his own Fendi, Gucci, and Louis Vuitton prints, Daps built an unlikely fashion empire, which defined the look of hip-hop in the 80s and 90s.
One day, one of the gangsters came, the #1 gangster in Harlem, Jack Jackson. He was a major figure in the underground crime. So he's pulling all these $100 bills out of this Louis Vuitton pouch. Everybody's getting excited. And it dawned on me. I said, if they're that excited about that $5 worth of vinyl, imagine if I can get them walking around looking like luggage. And that gave birth to what I'm known for today is logomania. The cross, the ankh, the Star of David. I say symbolism is so important. So I took a brand and it became my brand. And I took another brand and that became my brand. And I took another brand and that became my brand. So I had all these brands, so I was the brand man.
Everyone in hip hop loves logos, and I think it's very much like a badge of honor. And you have to remember, if you go back to a lot of the roots, a lot of times people couldn't afford it. So to be able to put on something like a Gucci or Louis Vuitton, the C's of the House of Chanel, it shows that you're able to buy something and wear it in a way that isn't expected of you.
You didn't call it knockoff, did you? You called it something
No,
else.
it wasn't knockoffs, because a knockoff is when you buy something that's made exactly like the company is selling. But I do what our culture do. I'm not here to dictate fashion. I'm here to translate culture. We look at things and then we interpret those things through our culture, And then when you do that successfully, that's a knockoff.
You have to remember, in the beginning, rappers couldn't afford his clothing. The clothes were thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. Who could really afford it were people from the streets. Drug dealers like Alpo Martinez, they were the ones wearing like the famous snorkel and the Dapper Dan furs. And it was only afterwards when rappers like LL Cool J, Eric B. and Rakim, Big Daddy Kane, when they started making money, they wanted to emulate that Dapper Dan look. It started in the streets, it started in the corners, with the drug dealers, with the hustlers, and then it permeated into the rappers and on stage.
So it was going brilliantly for 10 years, your business, your shop, and then the brands came knocking, didn't they?
Yeah, the brands came knocking. So one by one, they kept raiding me and shutting me down and raiding me. As the culture began to shift, it didn't make sense for them to ignore it anymore, It made more sense to take it and control it. In order to do that, they had to shut me down.
But in 2017, everything changed again for you. After being underground for a while, after your shop got shut down, what happened in 2017?
In 2017, one of the pieces that I had did 20 years earlier for Diane Dixon, a gold medal Olympian, she had came and I made her a bomber with a mink body and Louis Vuitton sleeves. And Alexander Michel, the lead designer for Gucci at the time, he copied it, and he changed history that moment.
What was crazy was immediately the internet and those eagle-eyed watchers, they called them out. And they said, look, you stole that from Dapper Dan. And in fact, Diane Dixon took to Instagram and also did kind of a side-by-side of who wore it first. And what's quite interesting, it was really social media, a lot of people within fashion media, really kind of coming around Dan and saying that he needs to be credited properly.
Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang. Gucci gang. Spread their racks on new chain. Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang.
Gucci could have just dismissed it, but the volume of response in social media just put so much pressure on the brand till they say, well, let's just partner with him. So when they first came, they called my son. He said, Dad, Gucci got in touch with me. He said they want to partner with you. I said, son, quit playing with me. He said, no, Dad, they really want to get a partner. I said, it's a trick. He said, no, Dad, they're serious. I said, if they're serious, tell them to come to Harlem. And they came. I said, if they're serious, tell them I have to continue doing everything the way I've been doing it. And they said, okay. I say, if they're serious, I have to have my own atelier in Harlem. And they said, okay. I never had any contact over a period of 30 years with the fashion industry, and all of a sudden they come and take me from Harlem, you know, put me on this pedestal, and then allow me to do what I gave birth to, this idea of logomania, and do it right in Harlem. History is going to show that that was like a really golden moment for hip-hop as well as for European fashion.
To have Gucci and his atelier being in Harlem, it's incredible, right? It's so symbolic, and it shows a European house really kind of putting stakes in hip-hop in a real way.
Nothing shows the link between hip-hop's music and style than musician Pharrell Williams' first fashion show in June, unveiling his menswear collection for Parisian brand Louis Vuitton.
In 2023, if I had to name one person carrying the hip-hop torch, I have to give it to Pharrell Williams. So as we know, he was recently taken on the role at Louis Vuitton as creative director. This follows in the steps of Virgil Abloh, who tragically passed away a few years ago. And if you saw that runway in Paris, it was all Pharrell. I mean, there were pieces of streetwear, there were pieces from his hip-hop discography. I mean, the fact that he had Rihanna, a woman who's pregnant at the moment, being the face of this menswear line, I mean, it's iconic, and it really shows someone like Pharrell who has really invested in hip-hop and in fashion for decades.
I hope the world's paying attention, because what does Pharrell, being who he is, mean? He's a hip-hop artist, right? He's a lover of fashion, and he brought this whole idea of what it was always about to the pinnacle when he accepted that position at Louis Vuitton. This collection, when you look at it, you cannot escape the fact that that comes from street culture. And so that's what it is.
Dapper Dan, thank you so much.
Give it to me. Give me that funk, that sweet, that nasty, that gushy stuff. But don't bullshit me. Come on. Give me that funk.
Pharrell turned Paris's oldest bridge into a hip-hop celeb-filled party with Beyoncé, Jay-Z and Zendaya all present, as well as Rihanna and A$AP Rocky. 50 years on since the birth of hip-hop, Jay-Z and Pharrell's performance of I Just Wanna Love You is a perfect example of the successful and blossoming marriage between hip-hop and fashion.
Zip zero. Might buy Chris. That about